Black lives can't matter only if an officer is punished. Mm-hmm. Black lives can't matter only when we die.
Take a little break from the crazy, try to recalibrate. Every day seem to be hazy, I see doom. Everybody sick with obsession, it's hard to navigate. Take your baggage out of my space, I need room. Reset. New world order. Reset. New world order.
Hey, what's going on?
What's up? Good to see you.
Nothing. Feeling like Teddy Riley over here.
Nah, you coming through clear. I don't see no spin wheels. You don't have a whole band. You don't have a whole band in the back. You good. You good, buddy.
That's so funny.
I feel honored. I'm grateful that you're able to join. When I reached out to you originally, we were dealing with just the pandemic. And then now we have this added element of an uprising or another iteration of the uprising. And, just for folks joining, I'm JP Reynolds. I am a music artist, entrepreneur and educator. And I'm being joined right now by a good friend and a comrade, Derecka Purnell. We're going to be talking human rights, wellness. And, I'll let Derecka kind of talk more about her own work. But I'm really excited for this conversation. I think it's incredibly timely. I want to start off by saying thank you, Derecka, because you're one of the people who I kind of look to for language around human rights. The language that I've adopted from you is abolition.
Okay.
It's interesting seeing the world, or at least from a Twitter perspective. I see people adopting this language more readily now than they did when I first adopted the language from you. Right? I think a few years ago when you were one of the first people I know of that started saying abolish the police, and immediately I'm like, oh, I'm down with that. Like, yeah, like when I hear the word abolition, I immediately think about the system of enslavement. We know that the systems of enslavement and the system of policing are inextricably linked.
Yes.
But one of the things that I think a lot of folks have asked me as I've been in conversations and been in spaces and talk about abolish the police, defund the police. The thing that they ask me is, well, how do you do that? What about reform? I thought we were trying to reform. And I'm like, listen, man, go read this article by Derecka Purnell and then we could talk, right? So now that I got you here, can you give us some insight on really just the basic, right? I think people like you and I identify as abolitionists and not reformers. Mm-hmm. And can you shed some light on that and what that means?
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me. The last week has been such a whirlwind. I was really looking forward to this conversation, and just so happy to be here. To be, you're one of my spiritual heroes, and so it feels good to just be in conversation with you. And where to even start with the abolition versus reform conversation? Why don't we call ourselves reformers? So, I don't know, 200 years ago, it's 2020, about 200 years ago, people were trying to figure out what to do around the slavery question. Right. People, like slave owners, were under the impression that Black people would just sort of die out, that we would just die, that we wouldn't even make it. So there were some people who were really interested in what do we do with all these people of African descent. And other people who were just like, well, that question won't really become right. So we won't even really entertain it because, there's sort of a weak race. We're going to take all that we can out of them, and they're just unfortunately going to die. And when time passed on and people realized they're going to continue to reproduce. And even if we ban the importation of, people of African descent from the continent, it doesn't mean that they're automatically going to die, especially people who are in the territories here versus people in the Caribbean. And so then it becomes this question, okay, so what is going to be their fate? So if you look at that tradition, now when we talk about it, we call all those people abolitionists, right? Anyone who was against slavery were abolitionists. When we look into the history, there were people who were against the institution of slavery, but I'm struggling about whether we should call them or think of them as abolitionists, right? Because abolitionists have sort of a heroic ring to it, people who are standing up for people who are oppressed, people who are standing up for the enslaved, people who are standing up for folks who were indigenous and also were enslaved. And there are a lot of people who were against slavery, but who weren't for the liberation of Black people. Mm-hmm. Right? They were against the institution of slavery. There were a lot of poor white people who were against the institution of slavery and convict leasing. but they were against it because it was driving down the cost of labor. So they wanted to end slavery, not because they believe in Black liberation, but because they wanted jobs. And they were like, y'all having, Black people work for free is keeping the cost of the wage low for us. So they were against slavery. There were people who were against slavery because they didn't like, how cotton and the hype and what it took to be a slave owner back then, the landed aristocracy, and there were northern industrialists who initially were getting so much money from like the institution of slavery. They wanted to test out other types of industries. And so they weren't necessarily interested in the liberation of Black people, but they were against the institution of slavery. There were also people, even abolitionists, who weren't even committed to like Black people having a certain level of freedom and citizenship in this country. There were abolitionists who were interested in sending Black people back to Africa. That happened through, the creation of the colony of Liberia ultimately. So if you look across the broad spectrum of what it meant to be against slavery, it included people who were abolitionists, but it also included all of this other stuff. Now we have an opportunity to act. What is it that we're actually against? So we're against police violence. We're against prisons as sites of violence. But also, what are we for? So if we're for safety, it's not enough to try to reform police, right? It's not enough to try to stop the individual acts of police brutality, individual acts of police violence. If the institution itself is violent. So to reform something typically means to make better. And people in the South, slave owners who wanted to preserve slavery, they tried to say, oh, no. Black people, they're happy. They're good. They don't have to worry about shelter or food. We take care of them. We can improve the way we take care of them, right? And so people were interested in reforming slavery. And for some people, that was enough. And so it's like, well, do we want, police officers, and do we want them to be able to police better? So what does it mean to police? You have 1 million law enforcement officers in this country, 18,000 law enforcement agents in this country. It's more than just like the people who go viral on videos. It's about what they do, the bulk of their work. The job isn't good. So do we want like freedom, or do we want a system that better harasses, detains, and arrests people? And I think we want freedom.
We absolutely want freedom. You are a constant voice for that, and your work exists in so many ways. You are a writer. You are an activist. I know you as an educator as well. You're also a lawyer. I think it's interesting to frame all of this conversation under the guise of human rights, because again, that shifts, the understanding from just an economic perspective. People want jobs. That shifts from just a political perspective of who has more capital when it comes to voting. It's about the human right to live and the human right to exist and to do all the things that we are capable of doing, we are called to do. And that's why it's so interesting and so important, I think, that we frame in this moment, right? This moment feels a little different. And I want to know why you think this moment feels a little different. But I think it's so important to frame this moment in the context of human rights, because it is about like the liberation of Black people, right? It's not just this political economic thing. It's about like the liberation of Black people. I've been talking to a bunch of folks over the past couple of weeks since this particular part of the uprising has happened. For folks who've been doing this work for a long time, for folks who have, kind of been talking about these things. We were called crazy years ago. We were ignored. Folks have kind of scoffed at us. And I don't know if you feel this way, but one thing that I have felt over the last couple of weeks is that this time feels different. Like, I have some thoughts of why that is, but why you think that is? Why does it feel different now? What is different? What's your insight on that?
Yeah, I mean, not only were people dismissive of police abolition the last few years, since 2014, I mean, I consider myself a baby abolitionist. I didn't start really thinking through and studying the politics of abolition until like 2016, like around that time, like my second year of law school, where I was like, wow, as I began to study and understand the law more and more, I realized like, we've been demanding constitutional policing, but the police have the power to be constitutionally violent. Right. So it doesn't mean that just because it's constitutional that it's less violent, right? Yeah. So not only have that the policies of abolition have been disregarded and dismissed since 2014, when the conversation around the prison industrial complex hit the scene again, it's been dismissed for over a decade. You know, Critical Resistance was an organization that came out of this huge conference in 1998 or 1999. Rachel is going to fight me if I don't remember the date, but I don't remember right now.
Yeah.
You know, they were founded as a prison industrial complex abolitionist organization. And people were just like, who, wait, what?
Right.
And this isn't, I was in third grade,
right.
you know?
Yeah.
And even before, you know, Critical Resistance, there were, you know, scholars and activists who were talking about, you know, reducing the size of prisons, you know, having, you know, Black people patrol their own communities at one point was put on the table instead of police officers.
Yeah.
If you go all the way back to W.B. Du Bois writing in Black Reconstruction, now he has an entire chapter on abolition democracy and the promises of what Reconstruction could have been, would have been, but for the betrayal of the federal government, you know. So the politics of abolition have been undermined since there's been a politics of abolition. Because there's also a politics of white supremacy and heteropatriarchy in this country. There's a politics of capitalism in this country. And it sells people on it. So as long as that there's going to be that, there's going to be the politics are going to be contested. And so I completely agree with you. This moment feels so exciting for me because I know in 2014, when Darren Wilson murdered Michael Brown on Canfield Drive, you know, I was very much send those killer cops to jail, arrest, indict, convict, very much like we need, you know, body cameras. I was very much in that space. And over time, you know, I've been politicized to think differently about what's possible in this country, what's possible in this world. And watching the demands go from, you know, just simply indicting and convicting cops to defund police, I think that's worth celebrating. You know, and
I agree.
Right down the street, the mayor, Muriel Bowser, is currently proposing to increase the police budget. She painted Black Lives Matter in the street. And BY 100, DC, BLM, all these Black-led organizations in DC, they painted defund the police.
I saw that.
That's where we are.
And I think you're right. Oh man, there's so much in there. And I think you may have seen me get excited because this is like, whenever we get together and talk about this stuff, I'm getting excited about it because I'm like, you know, you mentioned something being a cause for celebration. You know, earlier today I was talking in my physical wellness conversation with Lance Woods, we talked about consistency and like expecting discouragement. And one of the things that I found that is really important on that journey of doing anything or setting a goal for a thing and then encountering discouragement is also knowing when to like take a moment to celebrate and say, this is the thing that we can feel victorious about. Now, that does not mean we stop, that we rest on laurels or just kick our feet up, but it is a thing to say, listen, there are things happening and moving in the direction of what our ultimate goal is, and that is important, and that is the thing that to cite. And I, you know, one of the things I see right now, and again, like why things feel different, is like people are talking about defunding the police, and I'm like, that language, and I'm like, what is happening right now? People are really considering this, like, what? And I'm like, for me, I'm like, well, you know, I'm a baby abolitionist too. I remember the first time I heard the phrase "demilitarize the police." I have to speak his name. His name is Jared Drake. He was a classmate of mine in undergrad, and he mentioned that like in 2007. He was a classmate. He mentioned it in 2007. I'm just like, what? How you do that? So now here we are with people literally talking about defunding the police. Abolish the police doesn't feel like such a curse word anymore, and you know what I'm saying? It's like there's things being considered right now. But even further, right? You mentioned heteropatriarchy. You mentioned the prison industrial complex. You mentioned capitalism, right? Like I've always thought about this three-headed monster of white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. And we're starting to see these things come to the fore. And I would love if you could. And these are huge questions right now, right? Of course, but could you give us a little bit of insight on the connection between abolishing the police and the prison industrial complex?
Yeah, of course. I'll try my best. So, you know, people who were working with and around critical resistance were paying attention to the military industrial complex. So how does the United States invade other countries? How does that then inform defense contracts? The need for always having to, you know, increase spending, increase war, get oil, extract resources, you know, give money to Raytheon or give money to any of the companies as you drive down the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. You see all the defense contractors right next door to the National Security Administration, right? So and they were looking at how, this system, this network, reinforced each other, informed each other, and reinforced each other, and applied that analysis to prisons. And, the way that, prisons boomed in California, right? Ruthie Wilson Gilmore's work boomed in California to create essentially a jobs program for people who had surplus labor, and then there needed to be some way to absorb that. And so prisons as like a program to get people to go to work. And how even with the private prison industry, like, well, we can't give you a jobs program in this rural area, but what we can do is build a prison there. And then we can try to sell the amount of beds. We can promise to keep it at capacity, right? Right. And so how all these different layers, how different phone companies, if you visit a loved one or visit someone in prison, you notice that there's so many different levels. There's the phone company, the email company, there's the correlates, right? There's the people who's charging you to use the lockers when you go inside the jail the first time. There's the cameras. I went to go visit someone, one of my family members who was locked up in Memphis a couple of years ago. And this is my first time going, not as a lawyer. This is me going and trying to get someone out, my little brother out. Okay. Right. I go in, I'm watching people get turned away because they have on leggings, because they have, spaghetti straps, because whatever, all these kind of arbitrary reasons. Right. They don't want people to have two pair of pants on. So if you have on, it was cold, it's February. So if you have on tights underneath your pants, then you were turned away, because there's a security issue. Right. And so I'm watching people get turned away left and right. Luckily, I had a couple of coins, was able to put stuff in a locker, and then, went to the back. I go into a room, and there's a screen where I'm seeing this person being like live streamed in from another room in the jail. And I said, so they made us go through all of the security, put stuff in lockers, go in and out, get pat down, get searched, just go in a room to watch someone on the screen. How am I going to sneak something into this person if they're in a whole different room, in a whole different hotel? So the company profits from selling people that camera access, right? The footage, the conversation, which is why I always tell people, if you get locked up, don't say anything over the phone. Like, don't do that. Don't do that, because what's going to happen is that those calls are going to be recorded and they can be used against you. Yeah. So that's roughly the prison industrial complex, and where, critical resistance came in and said that we need to abolish that. And since then, interestingly, prison abolition and police abolition, people talk about them separately. But I just, very simply, how do people get to jail? How do people get to prisons? They get there through police. So if there's any shrinking, reduction, or abolishment of those major institutions, those holding cages, we also have to reduce and abolish the apparatus that gets them there, and that's the police. Yeah. Usually your first encounter to the jails and prisons is through a police officer. So that's the connection,
Yeah, that thank you for that. That's very helpful. I think, there's so many intersectional places in this, and everything's so intertwined, and it's hard to pull it out. And again, I'm just thinking about human rights, right, and where folks can access their understanding of their own human right within this framework, and a lot of it is the information and understanding the connections between these things. There are still a lot of folks who, speaking about prison abolition as it relates to police abolition, and we still obviously have a long way to go for that conversation, even though it does seem to be on the table differently now. There still are so many folks, family members I have, folks I talk to, who are just, you mentioned this as a way you used to be a few years ago, send those killer cops to jail, right? What do you say to that self? It's like, yo, this is the shift. What do you say? Because there's a lot of folks who are there, and folks are coming around, but they may need a little something. What do you say to those folks?
I mean, here's the thing. If you've experienced police violence, if you've been pulled over or cursed out, hurt, you've seen these videos of police with their knees in our backs. You see them dragging away Freddie Gray and putting him into the back of a police van who's like obviously upset. I completely think it's okay for you to feel affirmed by the idea of them being punished.
Yes.
I can imagine that could soothe something. It's like, oh man, like we're about to get Exactly. Yeah, now you know what it's like to be in cuffs.
Yeah.
You know, now you know what it's like to sit in the back of a police car, to be booked, to be fingerprinted, to be your picture taken, taken, and it goes viral. It goes
through that set.
To be shared. That I think that people want to feel affirmed and like wanting that level of revenge, and like the idea to be like, hey guys, hey, settle down. This isn't abolition.
Right.
It's an easy way to lose a lot of people. Like, just to be honest, just like, yo, hey, everybody, So I completely understand that. When I see it, I just be like, wow, okay, someone was arrested. Like, all right, I try to keep myself neutral. Yeah. Even though I'm sure there's one part of me is like, oh, we in here.
Right,
like,
right. It's a balance to it. There's a balance.
Yeah, because I know the statistics. I know that more officers have been arrested and indicted and convicted in the last 5 years. I also know that the same amount of people have been killed.
Right. With all the reforms, the same amount of people.
With all the reforms, with all the arrests, indictments, convictions, we know that even if someone is arrested, it doesn't mean they're going to be convicted. Right. Even if they're indicted, it doesn't mean they're going to be convicted. Even if they are convicted, it doesn't mean they're going to serve 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. What society has told us is the amount of time that you should be in prison protecting someone else's life. Yeah. You look at Jason Van Dyke, who shot Laquan McDonald in the back 16 times. He got like 7.5 years. You look at, what's his name? Peter Liang, who killed a cop girlie in New York City. Yeah. After the prosecutor got a conviction, they said, Your Honor, we believe this was an honest mistake. We believe he is sorry. Please do not give him any time in prison. Right. He has suffered enough. A prosecutor said that. So even Peter Liang didn't spend a day in prison for killing a cop girlie. Right. So all that grace, all that, you can only serve a few years here and there, or you don't serve any time. That grace comes out for police officers. Yeah. But if you kill someone and it was a mistake, and you coming down the stairs and you're Black, you're gonna go to prison. Yeah. It's just, I know that if that is the bulk of the energy, if that is the bulk of the organizing towards convictions, it's going to exhaust us really, really quickly. And it's going to affirm the logic that prisons can keep us safe. Right. So Black lives can't matter only if an officer is punished. Mm-hmm. Black lives can't matter only when we die. Yeah. Black lives sitting in jail doesn't keep us more safe. It doesn't keep. There's still 1,000 people being killed. Even in the pandemic, we're on track to meet that number. Mm-hmm. We're on track to meet that number because police have not stopped killing. Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, do we care about punishing for Black death, or do we care about preserving Black lives? Yeah. And that leads me towards the abolitionist framework. Okay, we have to reduce contact between police and Black people. Reduce the contact between police and people who they police of all races. Mm-hmm. White people too. White people ain't safe.
Right. Nobody's safe from the system, right? And that's what I feel like is becoming a little more readily understood, right? That it's the system at work here, and the system is what the problem is, right? Like your article, right? Like what is the title of your article? The New York Times, like the police are the problem. What is it?
They can't solve the problem. They are the problem,
right? Man, Derecka, listen, I would love to talk about this all day long. I feel like I talk about this with folks often, and again, I'm thankful for the work you do, because it makes it easier for me to send folks a place where they can find a credible source for information on this perspective. So thank you for that. One thing we have a few more minutes. I do want to get. I'll say this. In addition to being like a fierce advocate for Black lives and for police abolition and prison abolition and all of these really important topics, I also know you'd be a person of joy. And I've been asking a lot of people about joy. I'm a person who believes that joy is also revolutionary. That's why I asked about celebration earlier. I think it's super important. Where are you experiencing joy right now? I think that testament and that witness is also affirming. And I would love to hear that from you, because I know you somewhere experiencing joy. And and in the midst, it's a resilient joy right now, but in the midst, we still have the capacity for joy. And it's not an ignorant joy, it's a resilient joy. I'm
also okay with people being ignorant. I think that's a lot of joy, being ignorant. And
that's a fact. No, that's a fact.
I'll tell you, my little sister, I was doing this event for the Maroon Project, making masks for the people. So we're putting together all these kits.
Yeah.
And there was this kid there. He was like, I don't know, 25, 26. I can say that because I'm 30. So yeah, he was a kid. And he was talking about people don't get bucked to bang that thing up no more. People his age and younger. And I was like,
wait, they don't get what?
Don't get amped when Juvie comes on.
Oh, really?
Yes. Last night I did an informal survey with my sisters. And I was like, is this true? Is this true? And so she said, no, people still get ignorant. So just to affirm certain kinds of ignorance.
Facts, yes. This is not an anti-ignorant space.
Yes. Some ignorance matters, not all ignorance.
Yes, thank you for that qualification.
So what do I find joy? Oh man, so many places, like in the streets, watching the protests grow. It feels like for the first time, I was nervous that the arrest an indictment of the police officers would make people go inside and be like, woo, we've done. But since he was arrested, the protests have only gotten bigger.
Yeah.
And more buck. They've gotten bigger and more buck.
Yeah.
And then he said, okay, we'll charge the other 3. People are still going outside. Like, you're not about to just hush us up with some arrests. We've been down this road. So we know what y'all trying to do. We know y'all want us to go inside. We know y'all want some little reforms. We know y'all want us to stay, build trust. No.
It's quiet.
No, we shut them down. So that's bringing me a lot of joy.
Yes.
Last night when I was praying, my 6-year-old, we do a little handshake and then we pray before he goes to sleep.
Uh-huh.
And after we prayed last night, he said, "Mommy, are there villains in the world?" And I said, "Yes." And he was like, "Okay." Last night we prayed for people who don't have money. We prayed for people who don't have food. We pray all this stuff. He was like, "Are the villains keeping, food and clothes and toys from the kids we prayed about tonight?" And I said, "Yeah, they are." And he was like, "What are their names? What are they called?" And I said, because he's thinking Decepticons, Transformers, there's names for villains that you watch all these movies.
Yeah.
He said, "What are their names?" And I said, "Capitalists." He said, "Capitalists?" I said, "Yeah." Oh man. He said, "How come they don't want people to work?" I said, "Well, they do want them to work. They just want to take all their money from them."
Oh.
He said, "Why? So they can do whatever they want to do?" I said, "Exactly." Wow. He said, "Is that why you're a lawyer?" I said, "Yes, that's why I'm a lawyer." He said, "So you can fight the capitalists?" I said, "Yes, exactly." And then he wrote me the wrong way a little bit. He said, "Are there female capitalists?" I said, "Female? You serious? How you already said there are female capitalists?" And then I said, actually, yes, there are women, capitalists come in all sizes, races, colors, yes. He said, "How do we defeat them?" I said, "Well, we got to keep convincing people that capitalists should not have everything, not that they should become capitalists too." So those kind of conversations where I didn't even know that, at 8:30 last night, I was going to have a conversation about capitalism with my son that was bound up in the Avengers. It was just, I was like, wow, that made me happy. So yeah, talking about Juvenile, talking about capitalism, my 6-year-old, talking about all this stuff, it's just this brings me joy. Music brings me joy. Talking stuff about insecure because I wanted to make a turn, but it's not making a turn I wanted to make.
Oh, it's not?
All of it. It's...
Oh, is it?
That's another
comment.
Yes.
Listen, this has been an amazing exchange here. I'm grateful for you. Yeah, I was gonna say, throw them books. We gonna pick them books up. Again, Derecka, thank you so much. It's funny. We ended with the wisdom from the young ones, and the scriptures say that the secrets of the kingdom are hidden in the hearts of the children.
Yeah.
And Ella Baker would say that the young people know the way. So I want to call on Ella's name. Thank you, everybody who's kind of tuned in. This is an ongoing conversation.
Is that a pothos? A devil's ivy?
How you know that? That's exactly what it is.
Okay, all right. Trying to make my thumb green.
I'm trying to get green. Listen, I had to get some plants up in here to save my life during this quarantine, and they've been growing. So I'm like, I'm grateful. But yeah, so we're gonna. I love to continue this conversation as always. Derecka's the homie.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Peace and power.
True.